Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be exploring biofeedback and the mind-body connection. Our guest is Patricia Norris, Clinical Director of the Biofeedback and Psychophysiology Center at the Menninger Foundation. Dr. Norris is the outgoing president of the Biofeedback Society of America. The mind-body connection. How are the mind and body connected?
Well, they're connected extremely intimately. As a matter of fact, a non-dualistic point of view says that for most respects they're one. Everything that happens physiologically is also coupled with an emotional and mental event, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And conversely, every psychological event, every mental or emotional event is accompanied by an appropriate physiological event. And so that in a way there's like a Newtonian locked-in kind of thing, except that when coupled with volition, it makes it possible to control all kinds of things. You can't have a single thought without it being reflected in your body, is really what I said in a more complicated way.
Does that suggest that one usually comes before the other?
No, not at all. When either they happen together. It's something like, the famous question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, they never come without the other. Every chicken contains eggs, and every egg contains chickens. It's part of a chicken and egg process, and one can't really exist without the other. And in us, at least, and in any living organism that has mental capacity, they exist together.
Which sets the limits of the relationship, the mind or the body?
I think the body puts lots of limitations. To some extent, we could think of our brain in one sense as a computer and as a filter. Let me explain what I mean by a filter. There are certain parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, for example, that we see in a very wide range that we don't. And there are certain sounds that we can hear in a very large range that we don't. At this moment, as your radio audience is listening to this program, also in their room are all the other radio programs and all the television programs that reach this area. And all they need to do is turn their dial and they would pick up another one. But the radio acts like a filter that can pick up one frequency or another frequency. They're all in the room. If we were able to hear every frequency that was in the room with us right now, it would be an incredible babble. But our ears are attuned to another frequency, and the radio helps bring this program's frequency down to something that we can hear. All the rest of them are there too, though.
Is that where awareness comes in terms of the body's response? Are we able to focus or filter or channel on one thing or another so that all of our awareness goes beyond what we're usually conscious of?
That's right, yeah. Our awareness probably goes very far beyond what we're usually conscious of. And the unconscious is a repository for all kinds of skills and information and probably everything that we've ever done and quite possibly well beyond that. And we just focus on one thing or another at a time, kind of like a flashlight picking up objects in a room or something. So, and a great deal of what we do is unconscious. If I want to, say, write a note to you, I might pick up a pencil and write a bunch of things and just think that I wanted to write it and about the content, and never think about how my hand has to operate to reach out, or how much I have to tighten my muscles to take hold of the pen, or the shape that I need to move my arm through to write the different letters, or the muscles involved, or the nerves involved, or any of those things. All of that happens unconsciously. But since we're so used to writing, we don't think of that as being amazing at all. Oh my goodness, the mind controlling the body, even though it's the content I want to express that really controls all that complex activity. But as soon as people start talking about maybe controlling heart rate or controlling the immune system, controlling white cells, then they think, how can the mind control the body? Our mind is always controlling our body. And the complex activities that people engage in, like the fantastic feats that we see of our Olympic athletes, the gymnastics and things like that, are so much more complex than controlling the autonomic nervous system, controlling salivation or gastrointestinal motility or things like that. That's just no comparison.
I'm thinking of a speed typist as someone who performs an amazing feat, and being able to express oneself with that machine and using that as an extension, and obviously not thinking about each and every letter that's going down on the page.
That's right. They don't think about the letters at all. They think about the content. And even when you're learning to type and you do have to think about the letters, you still don't think about the finger motions and what's involved in elevating and then pressing down the finger. So much of what we do is unconscious. In a certain way, we can become conscious of it.
What then is biofeedback, and how does it work?
Biofeedback provides the same kind of information about what's going on in, for example, heart rate or blood flow that we can see when we move our arm in space. In other words, biofeedback gives us a mirror or a window into parts of our body that we otherwise don't see or feel that directly or aren't used to paying attention to.
It helps us focus on what are otherwise unconscious aspects of our physical body?
That would be unconscious simply because we don't get feedback for it. Okay, most of the time, as we were talking about, we're not conscious of moving around or picking up pens or typing. And at the same time, you're also not conscious of, for instance, what your glands are doing, what your heart is doing. But it's not too hard to focus on them, and the body responds very rapidly when you do. If you focus right now on your salivary glands, and just feel them for a minute under your tongue, and probably just that act alone increases the salivation. If we were measuring it and then feeding it back to you on a little meter, you would see that the salivation is indeed increasing. Now, you don't really need that for salivation because you can feel it increasing. And so you're getting a sensory feedback. You're getting the increased fluid in your mouth. If you imagine that you have a big lemon and you're going to squeeze the juice and then drink the lemon juice, that may enhance the salivation even more. But if you try to think about, say, your shoulder getting warmer, increasing the blood flow by relaxing the blood vessels in your shoulder, it would be hard to tell for sure whether you were doing it or not. So you would need a temperature meter and watching an increase in warmth there, which means an increase in blood flow, to tell you were doing it initially. Although it's quite possible that both you and I warmed our shoulders just because I mentioned it now.
How does it physically work? Never having been exposed to biofeedback, I imagine there are some pieces of technology, some measuring equipment, and probably some electrodes of some sort that are attached to the body.
With the case of blood flow, it's just about the most simple of all. All you need is a little thermometer. And most of the equipment for feeding back temperature uses thermometers or thermistors that simply record the temperature on the surface in one place or another, and then amplifies it and shows it to you either digitally, so you can see tenths of a degree change, or possibly on a meter that just moves back and forth. For feeding back heart rate, for example, you use electrodes, or now they have little pulse meters and things like that. You use electrodes for feeding back muscle information.
Is the goal of biofeedback to help someone consciously focus on the unconscious changes in the body?
Yes, some biofeedback is used primarily right now, I think, for clinical applications, to help people gain some voluntary control over, for example, if they have high blood pressure, to learn how to reduce their blood pressure and maintain a lowered blood pressure without medication, or if they have irritable bowel syndrome, how to relax the motility of the intestines and to just eliminate that problem. But biofeedback can also be used just to help people gain more control. One of the big applications now is in preparing athletes for Olympics or for other events to help them become more conscious of their performance, to give them feedback on where they may be overstressing, to help them reach optimum amounts of arousal so that they can just optimize their performance. And there's been research to show that it's very effective.
Where did it come from? What are the origins of biofeedback? We have heard for thousands of years about people in India and Tibet and in the East using the mind to control the body and being able to perform amazing feats. What we look at as amazing feats from the outside.
Yeah. Can I comment on that for a minute? Okay. I think I implied that amazing feats like gymnastics are just as amazing. And in India, the orientation is very different. And in many of the Asian countries, whereas we're quite materialistic and interested in controlling the external world, and they're more interested in controlling the internal world. They're interested in subjectivism and noumenal experiences. They meditate a lot and so on. So, but to do the kinds of feats that we think are amazing, they spend a lot of time learning how to do that. They may spend the same number of hours learning, for example, to regulate heart rate or the other things that they do, as our skaters, say, that wins the Olympics, spends maybe from 4 years old, maybe 6 hours a day for 15 years. And if we were to spend the same amount of time trying to regulate internal processes, we might all be able to produce and eliminate cysts at will and do all of the things that we consider to be amazing. In fact, in India, they have sort of autonomic Olympics, and yogis come from all over the place, and they compete, very much like we compete with physical things. And they have some yogis, for instance, can sit in snow in a loincloth and dry a blanket that's placed over them using breath and energy. And there are yogis that are 2-blanket yogis and yogis that are 10-blanket yogis, kind of like having a PhD in Tumo. They call that exercise Tumo. And it's just a matter of emphasis. If we, spent a lot of time, we could control many, many things. So one of the exciting things of biofeedback is that it's starting to open up a realization that we have a lot more potential for healing, for voluntary control of all kinds of things than we formerly thought was possible. We in the West, anyway.
We have come at it with technology. We have come at it with sophisticated measuring devices and electronics and computer technology and this sort of thing. They went at it obviously much differently and were able to perform these feats much before we were able to analyze what it was that they were doing. They would sit in the snow and dry a wet blanket, and now we can say, yes, what they're doing is they're raising the temperature of their body, and this is happening, and the chemical process is taking place, and all these other things. How did they get to that point before we figured out how it works?
Well, I'm not sure I even know the answer to that. As I said before, the whole direction of their interest was different. They turned within, they explored, they observed. They're excellent observers of internal processes. When they tried a certain strategy, they observed what the result of it was, and then by word of mouth, they developed things. And if the two cultures are not as disparate as I'm making them out right now, but were they, then if we were making a recording in India, we might well say, how did people ever figure out that they could fly an airplane before they ever tried to do it, or something like that, It's...
Are you able, some people have suggested that you can control pain such that if you master the technique, you can go to the dentist's office and he can drill on a tooth, and you don't need any kind of painkiller.
A lot of people have learned to do it. I don't think there's any feedback. So when they're learning to do that, in some ways, it's more like how we were talking about people doing it in the East, or just having confidence that they can do it. But for a long time, we've known that with hypnosis, for example, we could help people to eliminate pain. And since they can do it with hypnosis, they can do it themselves because the hypnotist has no strings into their body. It's a matter, the hypnotism really provides a context of believability or confidence, which is like the placebo effect, that in terms of if you're positive that something is going to happen inside your body, it's much more likely to do so.
Do you have to get yourself, again, I guess this is the same question I asked earlier, into a special state of mind, a sort of self-hypnosis, in order to have the greatest effect of biofeedback?
In the beginning, it's easier to learn if a person is quiet. But later on, the idea is to be able to have those kinds of controls under any condition. And people do learn how to do that. And I don't think it's like self-hypnosis at all. Or I think I'll take that back a little bit and say it has some similarities to self-hypnosis, but it also has almost some similarities to dehypnosis or freeing one and giving more choice.
Distracting the senses or concentrating on the senses?
I think the pain control happens in a number of different ways, and sometimes it's by the body producing a lot more endorphins, and which are some of the natural opiates that the body produces under certain conditions. And I think sometimes by bypassing nerve channels that just happen automatically. It might sound a little bit like mumbo jumbo, but remember that if you move your arm out, you're using certain nerve channels that you never need to be aware of either.
10 or 15 years ago, biofeedback was sort of on the fringe. Now it's much more involved in mainstream medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that there's been a shift of thinking in the mainstream scientists and physicians that have enabled them to encompass the benefits of biofeedback?
To some extent, there has been a shift. I also think that biofeedback has just proven itself, and that more of the mechanisms of how it works have been uncovered. But there is also a shift in thinking in mainstream medicine, not only about biofeedback, but about many other areas of patient potential and patient responsibility and healing. And one example is the newly emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology, of people learning how to enhance their immune system's ability to heal itself. And the research in that area covers animal research and human research, both prospective and retrospective studies. And in terms of what we were talking about earlier, there's a good illustration coming from that, where it's been shown that, once again under hypnosis, which does provide a certain confidence level in an individual, people can send more white cells to one arm than another, for example, or can enhance what's called the natural killer cell activity of some of the white cells. That the natural killer cell activity is kind of like their potency or virility, in a way, to attack tumors and other things.
It's a cancer therapy?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, the field is looking at how the mind affects the immune system and how people might be able to bring that under more voluntary control, not just for cancer, but for many other areas too.
When we are fully established in using biofeedback for the basic things like the control of pain, working toward disease control, and some of the things that we've touched on so far, where are we going to go from there? Is there a greater potential, or is that what we hope for, is better Olympic times and some fewer diseases? Those are
very worthwhile goals in themselves. Particular, maybe not better Olympic times exactly, but very healthy bodies capable of peak performance and wellness and well-being. I think that that where we're headed really is to give each person a sense of their own potential for a lot more choice in the psychological as well as the physical domain. We're coming out of an era in which had a belief, almost like a cultural belief, that we're victims of so many things that happen, victims of our environment, victims of our inheritance, victims of our upbringing, and I think that already this viewpoint is changing to some extent, and people are becoming more aware of their own potential to make choices in physical health and also in a lot of other ways.
Are there spiritual overtones in this area?
Yes, I think there are. I think when we talk about spirit, we're talking about different things. I have one idea of it, and among our listening audience, there may be many, many ideas. But whether we're thinking about it in terms of like a soul or a higher self, or whether we're thinking of it simply in terms of one's values, regardless of how a person thinks of it, I think that there is a spiritual implication. One of the things that we say, in fact, is that wellness depends on kind of an integration between body, emotions, mind, and spirit. However a person wishes to define spirit, it's definitely a part of everyone's choice making and part of what gives a meaning to a person's life. In other words, what I'm saying is it needn't be connected to a religion, but in some way we all know when our spirit is up or our spirit is down, and how important this other kind of meta-programming part of us is.
Let's go back to the yogis for a second. We've talked about the mind-body connection and the ability to use the mind in order to control certain functions and movements within the body. What about the discussion of the out-of-body experience? The yogis that are moving beyond that physical vessel in which they find themselves.
There's been a lot of interest recently in exploring out-of-the-body experiences. It's not related directly to biofeedback, I don't think, and at this point perhaps not so directly related to science either, in the sense that there's anything we can put an instrument on or make a measurement of or do a controlled study of. But the work of people like Raymond Moody and Kenneth Ring, some of the physicians who have written books about out-of-the-body experiences, show that there's enough similarity in these experiences that makes a person certainly feel that something is going on that's worth investigating further. It's hard for me to think exactly how to answer your question because I think we're getting more into an area of beliefs and more of an area into something that can't be directly measured.
Let's go back to the laboratory again, if we can. What kinds of experiments are you and your colleagues conducting now?
They're rather wide-ranging at the Menninger Foundation. We have research into the control of hypertension, a controlled study with people with high blood pressure who are learning how to reduce their blood pressure and to eliminate medications and so on. And this is a controlled study comparing people who are given various strategies which we have labeled self-monitoring strategy, self-exploration strategy, and self-regulation strategy. Then we have a research project that is called Physical Fields and States of Consciousness, which is also a funded research project, in which we're measuring the electromagnetic changes around a person that accompany certain states of consciousness. And it would be very elaborate to tell you just how we're doing it. But this is also a controlled study with individuals who are spending 45 minutes meditating with a magnet over their head, or in the controlled part absent, and present part of the time, and then filling out questionnaires and writing in a log, and a very large copper wall is reflecting the physical changes in magnetism and so on, and it's so sensitive that you can pick up every heartbeat and every breath on it, as well as other physical fields that may change around a person. At this point, the research is quite new, but it looks as though there are going to be some results from the very first part in which there was no feedback, and we were simply measuring the changes under certain conditions. But the exciting part, and I don't have any results from it yet, will be the next phase in which the people are going to receive feedback of the changing fields to see whether or not we can then magnify certain fields that surround the body.
We've talked about the mind-body connection and the mind having power over the body, and helping to control bodily functions. Does it sometimes work that the mind can have control over the mind?
Oh, yes. With biofeedback, of course, as the name implies, we're detecting and feeding back biological signals. And as we started out saying in the very beginning, in some ways the mind and body are not split at all. They're just one-on-one. But we have used the biofeedback technique since this is true, since they are so intimately connected, and since so much that happens psychologically is reflected in the body. Learning how to quiet the body can have a tremendous amount of psychological impact. And as people begin to eliminate some of the physiologic defenses that they have erected against remembering things, or as defenses against painful earlier experiences, they begin oftentimes to remember those things, to recognize what started the problem in the first place, and to integrate what's going on. Biofeedback is really effective for helping people with depression under certain circumstances, for treating anxiety and phobias, and lots of other things that we tend to think of as just the mind, but that really are mind-body problems, panic disorders, and so on. And I think also that biofeedback helps a person to take a different position to some extent with respect to their mind. If we had hours, it might be hard to cover this subject, but let me say that there is a part of us, like a metaprogrammer. This relates even to what you were asking me about spirit, that can look at the mind, that can decide what to do with the mind, that can point the mind. I can decide that I'm going to use my mind to study French or to try to do math. I am responsible for the input to my mind, and there is a self or a part of us that somehow that tries to control our mind. Sometimes it runs away. We try to, for instance, everyone's had the experience of reading a whole page, coming to the bottom, and realizing that they didn't really get one word that they read. They were nervous or distracted, or, quote, their mind was elsewhere, so they start over again. And so in a way we could say, just like I have a body but I'm not my body, I could say I have a mind but I'm not my mind. Or maybe, to put it philosophically even a more interesting way, I have a body-mind, but I'm not my body-mind. Because the body and the mind are one. They're linked together. I can't think without using my brain's neurons. But there is an I that uses those brain's neurons. Maybe we could say that.